Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Hey everyone, my name is Yuriy, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of AiSDR. Before starting AiSDR, I have co-founded another company called Xdraft, which was in legal tech. Before that, I was a lawyer. So my transition from kind of lawyer to second-time founder in a sales space took some time. Both of my companies have been funded by YC, but I'm super excited to be building AiSDR today, because I think that what became possible with generative AI will transform tons of everyday tasks and industries, I would say. And when GPT-4 came out, I kind of told myself that like, hey, you can either be eaten by this or be on the forefront of change, right? So I made that choice to be on the forefront of change and be building this super exciting company. And being a second-time founder, I can reliably say that today is the greatest, most exciting time to start a company. So if you haven't started one yet, consider it. Seriously, consider it.
That's good advice. Yeah, it's never been more exciting, and in some ways, it's never been easier. In some ways,
Yes.
Like in some way, in other ways, it's never been fucking harder. But like in some ways, it's you've got a lot of help that's freely available, a lot of information freely available, right?
And it depends on your ambition, right? So essentially, probably it's gonna be harder now to build like $1 billion ARR company, right? Like a really huge company. But I think if you are thinking about like, oh, this is a nice kind of side hustle that can transform into like an independent business, like it's never been easier to launch an app, right? It's never been easier to find first customers for that app, right? And it's never been easier to get like minimal funding, like, I don't know, like 100K to get you started off the ground. So at that kind of entry stage entrepreneurship, I think what's going to happen is that we will have like an explosion of micro entrepreneurs who will build apps, and then we'll have like couple thousand people using it. And then essentially maybe what we will start seeing is a transition from like, okay, I work for this company and I get paid like, 10K a month, to like, oh, I have this like micro app or like 10 micro apps. Each of them generate like 1,000 per month for me, and that's my life.
Right, like there's quite a few solo entrepreneurs already that have done that for a while in the Chrome extension space, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and some of them have done extremely well out of that, and have a small portfolio of 1, 2, 5 Chrome extensions that do pretty well, and collectively, like you said, it's a decent amount of money, and it's not too difficult to launch them and put them together. So yeah, it's true. It's a very exciting time to be in this space. So look, thank you so much for joining me. First of all, it's I know how incredibly busy you are, and the stuff that you guys are doing over at AiSDR is it's all really taking off, and you've got a lot on your plate. So I really truly appreciate you taking the time to sit with me. It's not a small amount of time either. But we've got a lot to talk about because I find what you're doing is very much, it's very much in my wheelhouse. Obviously, being ex-sales, now current founder of a sales tech platform, and in the space of AI as well. It's all very, very, very relevant, I think, to our time, and I'm very curious about it, just on a selfish note. So, but before we get into that, like, I'm really interested in a couple of things you said in your intro, and the stuff I already knew about you, which was the fact that you used to be a lawyer, and then you're also both your startups, your previous one and your current one, you were part of YC, and obviously that's considered to be like the gold standard in the world in terms of what entrepreneurs and founders aim to achieve when it comes to being part of an accelerator. So I'm curious that you could talk a bit more about both your time as a lawyer and kind of what was it that occurred in your career as a lawyer to make you decide to throw in the towel and start your first business, and then a bit about what it's like to really be in to be part of a YC cohort.
Yeah. So I can talk really long about that. So feel free
We've
to
got the
interrupt me
time.
anytime. And thank you for the invitation because I really enjoyed our kind of first conversation. So like, why not make it public, right? So,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to start with my story as a lawyer. And as a lawyer, I've been doing pretty well, right? So I wanted to be a lawyer since school because I was good at talking, right? So I thought, like, I'm good at talking, so probably I should become a lawyer. So I, interestingly, my father is like an engineer, an actual engineer, not a software engineer, right? And he wanted me to become an engineer as well, right? So in school, I was studying in like mathematics first school. I had like 5 lessons, 5 hours of mathematics every day, right? Like 3 in algebra and like 2 in geometry, which was crazy. And so when I said that I want to be a lawyer, he's like, yeah, you can be a lawyer, but you also need to like apply for the like engineering school. I'm like, okay. So I applied to both engineering school and I got for like into university to become a software engineer, but I also got into law school. And since that was my kind of primary goal, I went to study as a lawyer. So graduated as a lawyer, then I was always very ambitious in the sense that like if you want to do something, you have to do it like at the best possible, highest possible level, right? So I could be like a lawyer or legal counsel at my father's company. I could be working in my kind of home city, but instead of kind of move to capital and then start working at one of the kind of top 10 law firms in the country, where I learned about like corporate M&A, things like that, international kind of legal rankings. And again, being very ambitious, I started like applying to all those different rankings, working on the highest profile deals. Probably like 3 years in, I was one of the like top 100 lawyers in Ukraine, recognized by a number of kind of international rankings in Europe as like best lawyer in real estate, best lawyer in corporate M&A, best lawyer in employment. It was going really well, right? The reason I decided to become a lawyer is because, or not the reason I decided, but what I realized is a kind of great advantage of being a lawyer is that you can start as an employee, but then grow up to become a co-owner, right? So this was very interesting because the concept of ownership as the path to like building wealth was always obvious to me. So
and there's not many other professions where that path is as clearly set out, is there?
Really? Yeah, exactly. Very few, to be honest, right? So you could argue that kind of stock options in startups is like a fraction of that, but not really, because with stock options you don't get decision-making power, right? While with partnership at the law firm you do. So it was very interesting.
And you don't really get any extra money either, unless there's a successful exit. And
Exactly.
And not everyone's screwed over during the exit process, which again is rare.
Exactly. Yeah. Too few founders talk about that part of the journey. So I was basically going through the kind of career ladder in the legal space, which was going really well for me, right? So I was enjoying it in the process. So I was not a lawyer who like hated his job and decided to build a startup. The idea for my first company, which was called Xtraft, came out of my everyday pains, right? So I was drafting corporate M&A contracts, right? And the way I did it, I opened up like 10 different previous work products, and then I started like copy and pasting different parts that will apply to this new deal, and then spend like hours making sure that everything is kind of nice and consistent. And when I did it, like, I don't know, 100 times, I thought like being a mathematician in my mind, like there should be a way to build a system where you can just like click, this are the terms, here's your contract. And that's basically how the idea for Xtraft was born. And luckily, right, my father had the insight to make sure that one of his sons is a software engineer. So my brother is a software engineer, so I reached out to him and said like, hey, I have this idea, like, do you think we can build a product around that? And he said, like, yeah, this is like a weekend project, right? So like it's super easy. So we built this kind of weekend project prototype, and it worked, right? So it started kind of doing exactly what I envisioned it to do, and that's kind of how Extract was born as an idea. But at that point of time, I thought of it as this kind of part-time side hustle app, right? I'm going to be building my career as a lawyer. Everything's going to be going well. Where I was wrong is that you can't build like an enterprise contract management startup part-time, right? Like it just doesn't work because you're selling to big companies. You have to spend time. You have to kind of just too difficult. So at some point of time, I think like 6 months in, so that realization came to me like relatively fast. I realized that, hey, you have to give it a real shot, right? And for that, you have to quit. That was not an easy decision because I had like a really high salary at a law firm and a very like ramen salary at my startup because it was barely funded at that point of time. We had like 100K investment, but I decided to kind of make a leap of faith. And on top of that, I signed a deal with my then employers that if I fail in a year, they will take me back. Right? So I was a good
That's
employee.
a good deal.
Yeah, it was a good deal. I was a good employee, so they were very kind of open to it. But I did not come back, right? So like, but it just kind of shows the level of uncertainty, right, that I had in my like it wasn't an obvious decision. It was a high risk, no idea about possible reward decision, right? Because at that point of time, I knew nothing about startups, right? I did not know you can actually sell them. I did not know you can actually venture fund them. I did not know what SaaS is, right? I was doing all of it, right? Talking to customers, validating, etc. I did not know all the terminology because at that point of time in Ukraine, where I started, nobody was doing startups, right? And we like I jumped into it full time. We started getting first customers, etc. And then I get this realization that, look, you always, when I'm doing something, I have to do like the best possible version of it, right? To do that, I have to learn how to build startups. Where do you learn? At a startup university, also known as accelerators, right? That's how I viewed them at that point of time. But I applied to two. I applied to Techstars London, which was like a great tech hub at that point of time, and then Y Combinator. The reason we applied to Y Combinator is that at that point of time, Y Combinator was visiting Kyiv. So they came to visit. It was their one and only visit to Kyiv. And my startup was shortlisted. I talked to the YC partner, Gustav Alströmer, who has since then become like a friend and a partner for both of my startups in Y Combinator. But that kind of meeting put YC on my map, and kind of I realized that, oh, so this is like the Harvard of kind of startups, right? So and then after that meeting, we applied to Y Combinator. Interestingly enough, it was like last minute application. Totally wasted that opportunity. Like we'll never do that again, because I thought that I am not ready. Like I'm not good enough. Like the product is not good enough. The traction is not there. Like shouldn't waste this nice people time, right, with my useless startup. And then like I know 5 hours before the application window closes, Gustav emails me saying, like, hey man, like where's your application? I wanted to recommend you. Like a YC partner wants to recommend you, which is basically like a guarantee for the interview. And I don't have an application, right?
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
So I put together this like terribly shitty application, right? we had this, you have to have a video, right? At that point of time, that was like 2018, right? So pre-COVID, like online, everything, Zoom, boom. So the way we recorded a video with me and my brother at the same time is I was sitting on a chair, and then he was in Amsterdam at that point of time. So near me was like another chair that was very high, and on that chair was notebook with him. So you can imagine
That's great.
how bad that video was.
Yeah.
So we recorded that video. The application was approximately the same level of quality. So we did not get it. Like, no surprise. Next cycle, so like 3 months later, we do a better application. We do a somewhat better video, still not great. And then on our third application, we learned a lot, right? So we understood what YC is expecting in terms of the application, which means like being super clear, leading with numbers versus marketing talk, and a lot of other points. And then we recorded a nice video in person. we do all that. This is our third applications. We're showing like consistent progress, right? Because that also matters for YC. And then we get invited to a pre-interview, right? So at that point of time, they were doing pre-interviews because they were flying everyone into Mountain View, right? And then if you're an international founder, they want to kind of validate that you qualify for that, essentially. So we hop on a call with Michael Seibel, right? And I'm on the business trip in a hotel. Oleg and I, we like train all the time, make sure that we can answer like consistently, super quickly, to the point. And then I connect, we start answering questions. I take most of the questions because I'm the business guy in our team. And then like probably, 5 minutes in the interview, the internet goes out in my hotel room.
Oh, God.
So luckily, Oleg is in Amsterdam and kind of everything. He knows some of the answers. So, and then I reconnect like 3 minutes later, 2 minutes left. I continue answering questions, and then Michael Seibel asks like, okay, so what is the inflection point for the startup? And then I give an answer that is like, because I never thought about it, right? So I never thought about it, and I give an answer that is like, meh. And
I guess you're probably a bit sort of flummoxed by the whole situation as well. So it's just
probably,
it's not really
right,
leaving you really focused, right?
But the primary goal, right, is that I don't actually know, right? So
Right.
I'm just gonna think on my feet, right? And basically after this call, he's like, okay, your time is up. Right? So and I'm like, great. Like, what do we do now? Luckily, right, a couple days later, we get an invitation. Then I like put together a list of like 153 questions that they can ask me. Answers to those questions. Then like Oleg and I train relentlessly on that. We talk to alumni. We have mock interviews, like all of this, and then we fly into.
Was this something they suggested for you guys to do, or was this just what you decided to do?
No. That was just me being crazy, right? So like
you being you.
Yes. I basically read everything like I could on like what do they ask you in interviews, how do you answer those questions, kind of all things like that. And then from there, I decided to put together that in like one Google Sheet, and then kind of write answers, and that became my kind of cheat sheet for YC interview. And essentially, we trained relentlessly. We go into the interview. We had Geoff Rolston, Eric Mikikovsky, and a third partner who is not at YC anymore. So it can exactly Holy Liu. So we had three partners, and we go kind of through all the questions. I give answers like everything is going really well, and then we like leave the interview, and I'm like, okay, like I think it's okay. The worst part is waiting, right? Because basically you're invited for like 11 a.m. and then you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, right? So I was walking around their campus for, I don't know, like 4 hours, trying to like keep myself together during all that time. And then you kind of we left, and when you're in, they call you. If not, you get an email. 6 p.m. They haven't called, no email. I start reading. Like if it goes really well, if it goes very easy, then you're definitely not in because they didn't go hard on you, which means that like they don't care. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably gonna be because it was pretty easy, so we have failed. And then we are working around like the Stanford shop, buying swag, so that everyone I'm having calls with from the US ask me like, oh, so you studied in Stanford? I'm like, no, I just shopped in the Stanford shop. And basically, we get a call from Jeff Ralston saying like, hey guys, we want to invite you. Here's the deal. At that point, it was $150,000 for 7%. I'm like, yes, whatever you say, yes, we want this, and we're in, right? And everything else is history, right? Because essentially that was the most transformative moment in our company's trajectory, right? Because before that, we were just like two guys building something, right? Trying to sell it and not really focused on speed of iteration, not really understanding like what venture capital is. We were reading it in the books, right? And then we lived through it. We lived through like high pressure environment that pushes you to like execute super fast, grow super fast. Like you go into those bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, bi-monthly, right? Bi-weekly, like every
Bi-weekly.
2 weeks. Yeah, you go into those bi-weekly meetings where you sit together kind of in a circle, like Founders Anonymous, saying like, this is what I promised last kind of meeting. This is how I delivered on it, right? And then you basically get like green, yellow, red on that, and that is discussed kind of in public. And in that room, right? So there were like 10 founders in that room. There was me, like 10 other companies, one of which was Deal, right? So Alex. At that point of time.
Oh, wow.
At that point of time.
I think they're actually sponsoring this episode.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. Amazing, right? So
yeah.
Amazing coincidence. So that was in 2019. And basically I was there with my like 10K MRR. And then like Alex was there with his like 6K MRR. Right? And we were like every day, right? Working on this, failing consistently, right? Like they had their problems, we had our problems, but we were all pushing to grow like really fast. And then that was kind of one part of it. And in the end of the day, like we doubled our revenue in like 10 weeks. Oh, wow. That's kind of the power of kind of Y Combinator and the environment they put you in. And then the other thing is that the Y Combinator fundraising machine is just like mind blowing. When I was trying to fundraise for my company in Europe, people were offering me like, oh, we're going to give you like 200,000 euros and we're going to value it like $1 million, €1 million. And that was generous, right? And then in YC, and we're going to get you through like due diligence, and we will get to minority protection rights, and like we can assign this big of a contract, which was totally fine for me because I was the one drafting those contracts not long time ago, right? And then I get into YC, and then I go to like a meeting with Hoslam, right? And they ask me like, so how much are you raising? And like, well, we're raising like $1 million on a $10 million post-money relationship. It's like, what? Why? Right? Like, you should be raising like $2 million and like whatever you want, valuation gap, it doesn't really matter. I'm like, really? Can I do that? Have you seen my revenue? right? And that's kind of the power of Y Combinator, where they sit like 2,000 investors in one room to see you pitch. And then they have an app where they can like you and you can have all the information about them. And like they trained us how to like come talk to investor, pitch your company, exchange details, and then break the conversation. Because basically you can't, your goal from the demo day, which was in person at that point of time, is to maximize the number of potential kind of investors you're talking to. So, and the goal of the investor is to learn as much as possible from a company at one point of time. So essentially what you should be doing is like meet investor, pitch investor, and then tell like, hey, thank you, happy to continue this conversation. Let's exchange details and then continue this conversation tomorrow, right? And they taught us how to do it, and we trained how to do it to make sure that basically kind of everything is running smoothly and we maxing out it. So this was transformative, right? Truly transformative. It showed me what startups are, what Silicon Valley is, why it works as it works, and it explained me that accelerators are not universities. Accelerators are growth and fundraising machines. And essentially, if you're talking to an accelerator and they tell you like, oh, we're gonna teach you and we're gonna give you like resources, like that's not what you should get from accelerator, because you pay with a lot of equity. So you have to make sure that kind of that equity transforms into a lot of growth and great fundraising terms. And then basically when I sold Xdraft, and after that, I actually thought that I will never start a company again because it was so hard, right? But when AI came to be, right, and kind of GPT-4 came to be, I'm like, okay, I just cannot afford to miss this opportunity, right? So I started AiSDR, and the first thing I did was apply to Y Combinator, right? So like, because this was such a kind of transformative experience at that point of time, and many people ask me like, why did you do that, right? You had investor network, you had everything ready. Honestly, like if at some point of time I was starting a third company, like even I know after AiSDR becomes public, I'm still going to go through Y Combinator, right? Because it's such a powerful network, right? That does not exist anywhere else. And I alone have now a pretty meaningful, powerful network, but it's a fraction of Y Combinators, right? And like,
and I assume a slightly different network is needed for each business too, right? So for your initial business, there will be a group of investors, a group of individuals that have a very keen interest on that particular line of startup. But for AiSDR, it may be a very, very different network for that. Yeah. And then the third business, again, completely different, right?
Yeah. And like I've read a lot of hate saying like, oh, Y Combinator like takes so much equity, like 7%, right? And then sometimes even more, like this is a steal. Man, like this is the absolute best investor you can have on your cap table. They are always there. They're always offering more. The network is there. The deals are there. And most importantly, right, they will always tell you the truth, right? Your startup is not gonna fundable, right? Or like your startup is not fundable, try to get to profitability to just make sure it survives versus like going big or going bust, which is the typical kind of venture model. And also the true kind of value of Y Combinator was shown to me when we were selling my first company. So we were selling it to a private equity backed platform company, right? So private equity lawyers were negotiating. It's a tough experience, right? So luckily, I was a lawyer before and I was working with exactly that kind of people before. So I knew how to stand my ground, but some terms, right, you just don't have the bargaining power, right? And there was a very kind of important provision regarding the liability, right? So basically, as in most deals, part of the compensation is paid in equity and part is paid in kind of money. But then the question is, what's your liability? Is it money only, or is it kind of equity and money same as what you actually receive. And obviously, the buying side wants it to be all money, right? And then the selling side wants it to be exactly what I received, because I don't want to be paying back money that I never got. And I was explaining that like, hey guys, this just makes sense, right? Like, I just don't have that money, right? That's it. And they said like, well, sorry, like this is our standard practice, etc. And then YC comes in, right? And they have this great transactional lawyer who is probably doing it like every day. And he's like, yeah, I hear you. We can't do that. And they're like, we understand, but this is our critical position. There's no way to renegotiate. Like, this will be a deal breaker. I understand, but we can't do that. So if you want to like have this deal and kind of have other deals with Y Combinator, like, let's be reasonable here. And that's it, right? They just agreed. We signed the deal. We sealed the deal. Done.
The power of Y Combinator.
The power of Y Combinator, right? Because if you are doing something not market standard, something kind of not nice, you're not just kind of messing with this one small insignificant company. You're messing with like 5,000 of them.
You're ruining that entire potential relationship.
Exactly.
Hundreds you'll just be blacklisted.
Unicorns. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and if you had done that yourself, like you said, they probably just would have said, okay, bye, and that's it. But
exactly. Yeah. So that kind of power in terms of network, fundraising, exit negotiations is worth much more than 7% of your equity, right? And like, if
that's
you
more than paid for itself over the years, more than paid
for itself.
Yeah.
So like, I would do it over and over again, and everyone who is like thinking like, should I apply? Yes, you should, right? Like, if they refused once, like, apply again and again and again and again and again until you get in, because it's so worth it, right? And this also kind of aligns well with the YC approach to this currently, where they say that now is the best time to build, right? So coming back to where we started, go build, go to Y Combinator, change the world, right? Like, let's do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad you're saying that, because I think you've maybe changed my mind as to whether, or made my decision for me about whether or not to apply with our startup. I guess the only thing for us is that we are still a little later on in the journey, and so that's maybe where it makes it a bit more complicated. But I'll definitely revisit that, because of you've made me excited about it. But it's also interesting, really interesting, I think, for a lot of people listening, because a lot of people listening are early stage founders, and I'm often asked by audience members and stuff about accelerators, and I've never been through one. I just know what I hear from other people, and I think that there are a certain handful that it's just a no-brainer, because every experience I hear people share with me, they say it's transformative, whether it's Y Combinator, Techstars, or a handful of others that really do make a huge difference. So I think, especially early on when you've got a lot to learn and it's a very new thing, to have those people in your corner to learn in that accelerated fashion. I mean, they do what they say on the tin, right? There's a reason they call them accelerators. They really physically do that.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Did you have to move out to the States then while you were on that program with them?
Yes. And I spent so after Y Combinator, I basically started living this dual life, where when I still spent some time, a lot of time kind of in Ukraine, where I'm originally from, but I spent an equal amount of time in the US, right? So during the program, I think we spent like a little less than 6 months there. So what I'm trying to do is kind of not to become a US tax resident. So I always kind of spend my time between kind of Ukraine and kind of the US in a way where I'm like almost 6 months a year in the US, but less than 6 months a year.
But how early on, especially when money is tight, right, for a startup, how does that work? Because that's something that I've never thought to ask anyone until just now, actually. Once you're accepted into something like that and you're not from the US, you have to pay for the travel, accommodation, all that can get pretty expensive, presumably, right? How do you justify
Correct.
that in an early stage startup when, every penny is really important? You're trying to be really, really smart about what you're spending on. How do you
Yeah.
manage to balance that?
So it's again basically a question of impact per dollar spent, right?
Right.
So you get money from Y Combinator, right? In the first case, it was 150K. In the second case, it was 500,000, right? So it's enough money to kind of make a living even in San Francisco. But once you're there, obviously you don't kind of live luxury, right? So you find the cheapest apartment, you split the cost with as many other founders as possible, right? So that's kind of how you
So
do
like
it.
shared housing kind of situation. Yeah.
Exactly. When
Yeah.
you go to like YC dinners, you take a little food to go, right? So you make sure that you save money, but being there does give you a lot of advantages, right? Because you meet people in person. You meet people in person who are also focused on this hyper growth, and this creates this kind of competition energy. Um, a very simple example from my first company was I was reaching out to companies who could be interested kind of in extract, right? And I was using Y Combinator as a sign of approval. So I reached out to like head of legal ops at Twitter at that point of time. And I said like, can we grab a coffee? And he said like, sure. And then I came by their office and we kind of had a coffee. I showed the demo. We had a conversation about legal technology in general. And then he said like, this is not a fit for us at the moment, but I know this guy who could be interested. And he introduced me to a person in legal operations in Slack. I showed him the product. I came referenced. We met near the kind of Salesforce Park in San Francisco. And we had a conversation. He said, "Oh, this is exactly what we're looking for." And then the conversation kicked off. And then a couple months later, they were our customers. And then they introduced me to like other people. So those introductions don't happen over Zoom because you have to like meet a person, you have to like them, and then like you start introducing them.
It's very hard to manufacture that online. Very hard.
Very
It could
hard.
probably be done, but it would be very, very difficult.
I don't think it can be done, honestly.
No?
You can kind of force it, right? Because you can be reaching out to people like asking for intros and then having those intros jumping on Zooms, but it will be forced and as a result slower and will
Right.
require like so much more effort.
And probably less authentic, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah,
And therefore I would easily imagine kind of the conversion rate dropping. And then same with the investors, right? So we left the demo day. I spoke to like a bunch of people in with different kind of venture firms, and then right around the corner, like I'm leaving for the evening. The demo day is over, and then there is Vinod Hosla, right? And basically a person from Hosla Ventures who I was talking to, and she waves at me and says like, "Hey, like come here, talk to Vinod for like 15 minutes." And I pitch him, and he's like, I like you, right? Like, let's meet at our office on Thursday. I'm like, does not happen online. That does not happen online, right? And then with my second company, with AiSDR, you get a privilege to like meet in person and chat with guys like Sam Altman, right? So he came to us and he like gave us a speech about the future of AI and what should we plan for kind of as YC founders building in AI. And then like you just have this casual, friendly conversation and people who seem completely out of reach, right? Like Sam Altman, Patrick Collison, Brian Chesky, Alex Buazes, right? So they now become just people you cross paths at a dinner event at YC, right? How much would you pay for that? I guess much more than a $5,000 a month San Francisco rent.
Right. So then it's a worthwhile reinvestment of the money that's been invested into you. You're seeing that as it's money that's going towards lead research, investor networking. It's a worthy. Yeah, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. I suppose you just wouldn't. Wouldn't maybe make sense if you were trying to fly over to San Francisco on your own without the network or access to Y Combinator to just try and make that happen. Maybe not so much, but once you've got that behind you, it's
San Francisco, I think, is investing a lot into enabling that, even kind of for founders who don't have that network. But generally, I agree with you. It would be more difficult.
So did you have to, I mean, just from a legal perspective too, then, as that's your wheelhouse, did you have to set up, as soon as you got accepted into YC, did you have to then set up a legal entity for the company in the US in order for that, for it to be invested? Because they couldn't presumably invest into a Ukrainian registered company. So that would have to be part of the process. Yeah.
Correct. So at that point,
and was that a fairly straightforward process? Did you find? Or?
No, anything but. But again, mostly my fault, right? So because being a lawyer, I tended to like overcomplicate things. So and I did not know what startups are and basically what is the best practice and what is the right way to do this. And as a result, I had like a legal entity in Ukraine, then I had a legal entity in EU, and then YC accepted us, so I had to basically create a legal entity in the US, like a Delaware C Corp, and then transfer the shareholding that I had in those two entities in like Ukraine and EU to the US company. And cherry on top, I had different shareholders here and here, right? So it was anything but kind of easy or trivial. And there was a lot of negotiations happening, and I think I had like Oric, a law firm that were working with us at that point of time, was not happy with the YC deal they offered. Since then they stopped offering it, because basically they said like, whatever you're doing, like if you're doing a foreign flip, which is exactly my case, we're gonna cap those expenses at $15,000, which was a fair price considering the complexity and considering the fact that eventually their kind of build price for that scope of work was like $60,000 or $70,000, right? So essentially, if not for that deal, I would have to pay like half of my YC investment to just set up the structure. And then kind of I learned that mistake with my second company. So when I got into YC, I again kind of used one of the kind of YC lawyer deals, and I said like, hey guys, I want like plain vanilla Delaware C Corp, standard terms company, no subsidiaries, nothing else. Just like, let's keep it simple.
Yeah, sometimes boring is best.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, right, the lawyer at that moment told me like, oh, I see you're a second-time founder, because second-time founders are usually the ones that want like plain vanilla. First-time founders always have like things that are really unique for them.
Like ridiculous non-negotiables. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. So AiSDR is also a US registered company then. I mean, are there not additional levels of complexity naturally in that being a non-US resident and being being someone from the EU? I mean, naturally there must be a huge level of complexity involving tax and citizenship or lack of thereof, et cetera, right?
Yes. So the most simple thing is EIN. So EIN is a like tax registration number that every company has to have. Without it, you can't open a bank account. All normal people and companies in the US take care of that in 3 days, right? Like give or take, because you give your SSN, right? So your social security number, and then you get your EIN based on that. Pretty much same thing, like super fast. Since I don't have an SSN, right, what I have to do is basically file a paper application that has to be sent to tax authorities via fax. When was the last time you sent a fax? Do you know how to send a fax?
There are probably people listening right now who are like, what is it? They're Googling what a fax is. Sorry, they're chat GPTing what a fax is.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're looking it up on TikTok right now.
Exactly, right? So you have to do that.
Yeah.
And that process takes, if you're lucky, 4 weeks,
Right.
right? And that was my process, right? Because of this. And without it, you can't have a bank account. Without the bank account, you can't have money. Without money, you can't pay for
Can't do
your
much.
anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to account for that as an international founder, and of course, kind of visas, but like that's easier to kind of resolve. So also, right, I'm not just non-US citizen, I'm Ukrainian. So like most US banks just don't want to touch me, right? Because there are like sanctioned territories, non-sanctioned territories, and there's just too much headache and compliance risk
Right.
to figure out for my.
So they just blanket say, just don't touch Ukrainians just to be safe.
Yeah. Like I don't want to
wow.
talk with this guy, right? So therefore, kind of the number of banks care is like a subsection of the overall kind of US banking system. But luckily, kind of there are banking companies in YC, right? So Brex, the most formidable probably of those. So they have YC founder programs and kind of deals and things like that. So that actually wasn't a problem, but something to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, look, a lot of my audience is based in the UK, so it's a fairly even split between UK and US, but obviously that's where the majority of my network is in, and I know a lot of founders ask me about that quite a lot too, about the old Delaware flip and what to do there, and I just always say I have no idea. Speak to a specialist. But apparently, it's there are a lot of services now online to make that a lot easier than they used to be.
Sure.
But interesting. Well, look, we're already coming up to the end of part one, but before we kind of wrap up this part one, obviously I want to get into AiSDR, right? Which is what you're doing now, and so why don't you give us a taste of what we're going to talk about a bit more in a moment, or for those listening and watching in a few days, which is you explained how you got the idea for the first business. So what? And I know you said ChatGPT came onto the scene, and then so you thought, I can't miss this opportunity. But presumably it must have started also to some degree with a problem, right? As it normally does. So in what capacity did you recognize that particular problem that AiSDR was going to solve? I'm assuming it was on your journey of being a founder itself, right? In trying to sell. So what describe to me that moment? What was that light bulb moment?
So basically, as a founder, right, I was doing founder-led sales for a long time, right? And if you're doing founder-led sales right, you're doing a lot of SDR tasks, right? So you're prospecting every day, LinkedIn outreach, email campaigns, manual, automated, cold calls, door-to-door sales. I was doing that as well, right?
Oh, really? Old school.
Yeah. Old school, yes. When we were in the US,
it's like residents. Like, would you like to buy some legal software?
Pretty much, right? So when we were in YC the first time, I basically put together a list of all the kind of law offices in Mountain View and Menlo Park, etc. And then I drove there and I, hello, like, do you believe in legal automation, right? and that did not go well, right? But I had that experience, conference sales. So I was doing that, like all the sales were originated and closed by me up until we got to like $1 million in ARR, right? So after that, I started hiring people for that role, and then kind of monitoring, teaching, training, onboarding, letting go, right? I was actually really strict about that. And we were changing like people in kind of sales and SDR probably every 6 months or so if they didn't kind of deliver what was expected.
Where were you hiring them? In the US or the
in the US? In the US. In the US, yes. At that point, we were like Y Combinator, US company funded, right. US sales focused. So didn't make sense to hire them anywhere else. Then when we were acquired, right, my kind of sales org with like me, one more sales rep, and like 2 SDRs changed into like a huge corporation that had like 20 SDRs, right? And then I was part of that process as well, right? So understanding how the campaigns kind of build and perform, and like working with them and managing them for our business line, and kind of all of that experience brought me to the realization that this is so inefficient, right? So like, because basically high performance of the SDR team rests on the passion and perseverance and commitment of an SDR, for whom this is very often their first time job, right? And this is such a huge disconnect. And when I saw that, like, hey, you actually can train AI now to write good research emails, research people you're reaching out to, respond in less than 10 minutes, follow up consistently and relentlessly, make sure everything is captured in the CRM. I'm like, what? Right? Like, this was such an eye-opening event for me, right? Because there was a function that was deeply broken, and the only way to do that was through like very robust process and control. And now you can basically fully automate it, because computers learned to talk and write. This was just so eye-opening. And
learned is a strong word, but we'll get to that.
Yes.
But yes. But yes, you're right. I mean, it was and still is kind of a mind-blowing situation that we find ourselves in, that suddenly we're kind of presented with this treasure trove of opportunities, and I think that we're all still kind of, or most of us are still kind of paralyzed as to what that means, and what the choices then are as a result, because there's kind of so many potentially on the horizon. But you took one and you ran with it, and we're going to get into that more. I especially want to ask you in a moment, in a moment for us, in a couple of days for those listening and watching, about what this means for SDR roles, right? Because that's the inevitable next question to ask.
Sure.
As this gets better, what does that mean? And I have my ideas, but I'd be curious to hear yours. Maybe we can share notes. But let's wrap up part one. Thank you so much for everyone, for you being here for this part one. We're going to take a quick break, but for those listening and watching, you're going to have to come back in a couple of days to catch part two. So yeah, that's it. End of part one.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Subscribe with notifications turned on to get notified when part 2 comes out. While you wait, please join in the conversation in the comments below.